It's 3 weeks to the Texas Senate primary on March 3rd, with battles raging on both sides of the political aisle. The outcome will not only say something about the direction of each party, but could play a role in the control of the Senate after this upcoming midterm.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel.
Joining us this week is one of the prime figures in that primary, four-term incumbent Texas Senator John Cornyn. Senator, it is great to see you again.
Thank you, Kim. Good to be with you. How
was your Super Bowl Sunday?
Well, there wasn't a Texas team in contention, so I was just sort of a disinterested observer. But I watched the game, good game. Unfortunately, defensive battle, low scoring, but I'm sure the best team won.
Yeah, it was boring, but the food was always good. So before we get to the Texas race, I actually just do want to ask you about a couple of headlines in Washington. Is the Department of Homeland Security going to shut down at the end of this week? It seems as though Democrats have maneuvered Republicans into this situation where they're going to hold that department hostage.
Yeah, it's mainly a symbolic move because, as you know, we funded the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, and Border Security very generously during the One Big Beautiful Bill. And so this isn't really going to affect the operations of ICE. What will be affected is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and TSA. And for some reason, this is just a bone that Democrats can't give up. Because they want to appeal to their anti-ICE, their defund law enforcement base that believes that interfering with a law enforcement operation is a smart thing to do. I think it's dangerous, as we've seen. So we'll see where it goes. It may end up in a continuing resolution or flatline funding from now till the end of the fiscal year.
They've put forward this list of about 10 demands. Some of them, it sounds as though the administration and Republicans are more than willing to look at. And in fact, issues like body cameras, you've already seen DHS Secretary Kristi Noem saying that they're rolling those out in Minneapolis and to follow across the country. But there are other provisions in there that strike me as hugely problematic. And for instance, a demand that, you cannot enter premises unless you have judicial warrants, saying that you can't go on certain locations, including courts. Where do negotiations, how are Republicans feeling about some of these or all of these demands?
Well, this is a wish list by the Democrats. And of course, as usual, they've overreached. But some of these are non-negotiable, in my opinion. Things like requiring judicial warrants. This is not a criminal proceeding. And in many instances, these individuals have exhausted all their legal remedies, and all that remains is a court order for ordering their repatriation or exit out of the country. And this is just another way to delay or interfere with that law enforcement process. Unfortunately, as we've seen, sometimes when civilians get involved in these law enforcement operations and resist the law enforcement orders, a tragedy can occur, which is terrible. But none of this is happening in places like Texas because we are not a sanctuary state and have no sanctuary cities. So law enforcement at the local and state level cooperate with ICE, and these transfers occur usually out of a jail cell into the custody of ICE, out of public view.
I've got one more related question on this. It's not so much about ICE's efforts, but of course, one of the reasons that the president first focused some attention on Minnesota was because of this massive corruption scandal that we discovered there. Outrageous sums of money stolen from federal government aid programs and misused. And I think a lot of listeners, including me, are asking, how could this have ever happened? We have a federal welfare system that transfers $1 trillion. I mean, just think about that number, $1 trillion every year to about 80 major anti-poverty programs. There are hundreds of more minor anti-poverty programs, 80 major ones. And what seems really clear in this scandal is that this system has just become too large and too complex for Congress to guarantee its basic integrity. We've got the example of Minnesota, but other states, the info that DOJ exposed about a federal government whose departments aren't talking to each other with old computer systems and a lot of waste. The whole program, I'm sure that it does actually help the needy, but it is also becoming this cash machine for fraudsters.
Yeah.
And we hear a lot about how you guys are going to investigate and find the bad guys, and that's all fine, except for that's still after the fact. And I guess my question is, what are Republicans going to do to actually reform this system, start it over, do something so that it actually works again?
Well, the basic problem is the federal government, when we spend money, send it to the various agencies that then contract with or grant funds to non-governmental organizations. And there's very little follow-up, very little oversight, very little accountability for those funds or how they're being spent. President Trump has initiated this review process, but I think what's happened in Minneapolis is just, again, the tip of the iceberg, because the problem is really systemic. So we're having a hearing about how fraud has infected the immigration enforcement programs. As you know, many NGOs are paid massive sums of money to help facilitate the Biden administration's open border policies. But this extends way beyond that as well. So we're looking at ways that we can enhance oversight, perhaps put in various contracts, various provisions that will permit regular audits, and ultimately debar some of the NGOs that are guilty of massive fraud. But this is just the beginning.
Well, let's talk about Texas. And let's just start. I want to ask you about the news. What do you make of this kind of striking GOP loss of this state Senate seat in the Fort Worth area, where a Democrat managed a 14-point win in an area that Trump had carried by 17 points in 2024. Yeah. What do you account for in that loss?
Well, part of it is how energized Democrats are. And as you know, President Trump, people have strong feelings either for or against him. And so that's one issue. Small turnout, roughly 15% of registered voters showed up in the election, and that can have surprising results depending on who goes to the polls. But I also think it went to the quality of the campaign that was run, or the lack of quality thereof. And this was not a ruby red district. This is more, I would say, more purple. And they ran as though this was a 100% Trump territory, which it is not. The incumbent, or former, I should say, state senator Kelly Hancock, who's now running for comptroller, won that district by 20%. And as you pointed out, Trump by 17. So we've got some work to do, but I think it's also a wake-up call that as going into these midterms, we're going to experience some significant headwinds.
Are Republicans doing enough to talk about the economy? And do you think that the actions in Minneapolis and ICE operations around the country were something that did play in that election, or not as much as it was reported?
Not as much as it might have been suggested. But I do think the massive increases in cost of living, inflation as a result of the 40-year high inflation, as a result of the massive shoveling of federal dollars out into the economy. Obviously, inflation has abated to some extent, but all of the increased costs of everything that, kitchen table provisions, everything inputs on the farm and the like, those are not going away, even though they're slowing down as a result of some of the new policies. So I think we're going to have to talk more about our accomplishments in the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's got a lot of stuff in there that we have not adequately talked about and explained to the public. I think that'll help. But I think also the president spent a lot of time, and I'm not being critical here, it's just a fact, he spent a lot of time focused on foreign affairs and international relations, which are very, very important, as you know, but those aren't the sorts of issues that drive people to the polls. And so he's our best campaigner and with the best megaphone. And so we're all going to have to focus, I think, more on these domestic issues and kitchen table issues, which some people call affordability, but which has always been the preeminent concern of voters.
Are you hearing that he's going to get out there more on that message?
Yes, I believe that's the case. Susie Wiles and James Blair and Chris LaCivita and his team are very skilled. They understand what the challenge is, and I think they're going to deploy him in a way that I think will be very, very helpful.
Let's talk about your race. You've been challenged by Attorney General Ken Paxton. There's another candidate, Wesley Hunt, in the race. In fact, I think there are 8 Republican candidates. Am I correct in that?
I think that's right. I've lost count, but
Yeah.
three main candidates.
Polling is generally looking to be about tied, is what I'm seeing. There was some new polling from the University of Houston suggesting Paxton had a bit of a lead. I've seen others showing you in the lead. What do you see this race actually coming down to? What in your mind is the choice for voters? Because some may say, these guys are both Republicans. Is this just about style or flavor of politics? Is this about substance? What is this race about in your mind?
Well, I think part of this race is about character and whether voters really care about this. The Attorney General, who has a bad record of corruption and other problems that he would carry into the general election and potentially lose this red Senate seat in Texas. And even if he didn't lose, it cost hundreds of millions of dollars to salvage him in a race where we could frankly spend the money in places like Georgia, North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Michigan. But obviously, President Trump is the dominant figure in Republican primaries now. But again, we only have 10 to 12% of registered voters who turn out in the primary. We're going to a runoff between the Attorney General and myself, and that's on May the 26th, and 10 weeks after the primary. And so the job for us is to turn out our voters. But I've simply spent too much of my adult life trying to build the Republican Party in Texas to see it destroyed by a corrupt candidate like the Attorney General. And so we are talking about all the things that hopefully motivate people to vote. The fact that we were successful in getting $11 billion in reimbursement to the state of Texas for securing the border or attempting to secure the border during the Biden administration, where the Texas taxpayer had to step up. And thanks to Governor Abbott and the Texas legislature and Operation Lone Star. So a lot of different issues there, I know, but the business case, as I call it, for my election is I won by 10 points in 2020, and I will help down ballot. The Attorney General will be an albatross and perhaps lose and divert a lot of money that it could otherwise be used to save the Senate majority, which I know is important to the president. It's important to me for the general election.
Just one more question on this, though. When you look at this race and this challenge against yourself, you've been in office for 4 terms. What's happening in the party to have brought about this kind of a challenge? Would you lay this all down to personal ambition on the part of an opponent, or is there something bigger going on in the party that you would have a kind of challenge like this, a split or a shift among the GOP that is something that there's a bigger statement to be made about what's happening inside the GOP?
I would say the main reason for the change is the dominance of President Trump. Larger than life personality. He's very popular among Republican primary voters. The Attorney General fashions himself as a MAGA warrior and issues, a dozen press releases every day, opening up a new investigation, filing an additional suit, obviously with a lot of earned media exposure. One of the problems running for the Senate is you run every 6 years, and we've been Texas. You got to reintroduce yourself to the voters, and this is more turned into, I think, a lot of this is more about personalities than substance. I believe we don't need more performance artists and grifters in the Congress. We need people who are willing to do the hard work of actually legislating. That's what I do, and but we'll see whether Texas voters still believe that a normal conservative Republican can win in a statewide race. But I'm betting they will say that, but it's going to be a fight.
Well, you keep mentioning Donald Trump. He has not endorsed in this race so far. If you're in the Senate, you have to be a bit of a betting man. What's your bet? Is he going to endorse in this race, and how's he going to endorse?
Well, it's been a little mysterious. I know we're talking to him. I'm talking to him periodically and his team, so I know he's following the race. I think, perhaps he doesn't want to disappoint some of his own supporters by picking sides in a three-way race, and where he's figuring very prominently. We are pointing out that I supported the president 99.3% of the time, which is what Republican majorities always do, is support the president of the same party and his policies. But maybe after the March 3rd primary, he'll decide to weigh in. If he does weigh in, I'm optimistic he will endorse me. But there's only one person on the planet who knows the answer to that question.
So you're thinking maybe an endorsement after the first primary, and as you head into a runoff. I will be very curious to see how this turns out. On the Democratic side, you've got State Rep James Talarico and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. They are also duking out on their side. Crockett's obviously an uber progressive and a pretty controversial candidate. Polls show she's got a chance of winning this. Where do you see the Democratic primary going? Who do you expect to come out on top?
Well, the funny thing is, Jasmine Crockett said, if I'm the Republican nominee, I will win. But you're right. Talarico is duking it out with Jasmine. Jasmine will say outrageous things, mainly punching President Trump figuratively in the nose every day. And of course, that gets a lot of support from the progressive or radical left. Talarico is relatively unknown. He's a state representative from outside of Austin. And but he's got running a good campaign, and he's raising a lot of money. And typically what happens in these races, as you know, because of the small dollar contributions that flow online to the Democrats, progressive left, he will be well financed. But I think either one of them will lose in the general election. If I'm the nominee, the only way they could possibly win is if we nominate a corrupt individual with all sorts of political and personal baggage that our Attorney General has.
Well, you've made this argument now a couple of times. You just did again that, and I saw your spokesman just make it a couple of days ago saying that a primary victory by you basically takes Texas off the competitive map. It won't be a race. And you'll essentially make it safe for the GOP. Go through that argument for me, because it's true. Democrats have had a 30-year losing streak in Texas at the highest levels, but Democrats have been throwing everything they have at getting Texas to go blue. It strikes me that even if you are the nominee, that they're going to pour everything they've got again into a Texas Senate race. And, there have been a couple of times, at least once, when things got pretty close. 2018, that Texas race, Beto O'Rourke, he, only lost by a little more than 2 points to Ted Cruz. What's your argument for why you take this off the map? I mean, the GOP is still going to have to spend money in this race, regardless of who is the nominee. Yes. Yes,
but I think I hold the record as the highest number of votes for a federal office in Texas history in 2020. So I'm guilty of occasionally speaking to a Democrat, and even worse, occasionally working with the Democrat when it's in the best interest of my state and the country. And that's a liability in a contested primary like this. So we will, I'm not saying it won't be competitive, but we'll be in much greater stead. I think if I'm the nominee, I think part of this is the fact we've been a Republican red state for so long, people just assume that it will always be that way. And unfortunately, when all these races are typically decided in the primary, you get candidates like the Attorney General who skated by previously, and they think, well, I've won before, and people knew, or maybe they didn't know about all this baggage I brought. but they run against unfunded or poorly funded candidates on the opposition. So I think my race is going to determine whether what I like to call a normal Texas conservative Republican can still win in Texas. I'm betting I can, and I think that'll be important for our state and also important for President Trump's agenda because he doesn't want to lose Texas on his watch. Obviously, that would be, and particularly spending a lot of money that could be used to pick up other Senate seats in other parts of the country. So we made this what I call the business case to the president and his team, and we await his decision one way or the other.
How worrisome is it to Republicans more broadly that this very kind of ugly primary, and let's be honest, it's been a pretty ugly, nasty primary you guys are having there in Texas, is hurting the party overall when it's going to come to the general election in Texas?
I think voters understand this is more about individuals, not the party. The record of the Attorney General having been impeached by the Republican House, having been sued on a whistleblower case by his own senior staff. He's blown up his family in the process. He's just become increasingly reckless to the point of becoming self-destructive. So I think it's really more about the candidate rather than the party. But I'm in the posture of trying to help my colleagues raise money in what I call the ATM machine for Republicans, which is the state of Texas. And now I find myself on the receiving end. But hopefully we get by this primary, and then I can help the rest of the team and help President Trump. And but it's a very unique and unusual position for me to be in, to be sure.
Well, last question. As we head into these midterms, people have been talking a lot about these granular battles, whether it be the redistricting that Texas has, which looks like we'll now be able to go ahead given the Supreme Court seems to have signed off on it, or these individual races like yours. We at the editorial page continued to remind folks that a lot of it's just going to come down to the mood of the country in general and whether or not there isn't one of these blue waves, or rather a reaction to the party that is in power in Congress and the White House at the moment. That gives you guys, 6-7 months to make a very good case and potentially do a few more things in Congress to let voters know that you are doing something on those affordability questions. What do you see happening over the next months? Are we going to have another reconciliation bill? What are you doing on housing? Give us a flavor of what the Senate's business is going to be from now until November.
Well, as you know, Kim, history's not on our side.
It's not.
And so we're going to have to overcome that. And there is some talk about another reconciliation bill. And the Republican Study Committee under Congressman Pfluger have issued a framework. I'm told they're talking to the Speaker about putting that on the floor, which would help. But a lot of it is explaining to people what's at stake. I mean, the Democrats have just gone crazy, but unfortunately, they are winning in places where they shouldn't be winning. And I think a lot of that is because we have not adequately communicated what people care most about, which is what I call kitchen table issues. Affordability, became the buzzword after the election of Mayor Mondani in New York, but it's really nothing new. And so I think we need to focus on those sorts of things. You mentioned housing. I know the House of Representatives is taking up a housing bill this week. There's a housing bill in the Senate under Chairman Tim Scott that I think is just about ready for prime time. And so I think if people see us working at it, trying to provide some relief for them, that they will respond. But again, it's going to be who shows up and who's the most energized going into the midterms.
Well, Senator John Cornyn, we thank you for coming on, giving us this overview of all the excitement that's coming up in Texas. We want to thank our listeners for tuning in as well. We are here every week. If you like the show, please do hit the subscribe button. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, you can at atcam@wsj.com.